We're going to hear from Tamar Charney. Tamar used to be with NPR, and now she's with Charney LLC. And she's going to be talking to us about things all journalists should know about audio storytelling. Tamar.
Wait, I lost the mic. Ready? Okay. Thank you, Gary, and good morning. So yeah, audio storytelling at a conference on AI. That's what we're gonna go do now. Because in a lot of ways, AI has really been changing audio storytelling, and we'll get into a little bit of that. So I am an editorial strategist, and I've worked a lot in the intersection of technology and audio storytelling with each change in technology, and we'll get into that in a minute, mostly in the public media system. All right. So we're going to start by playing a little bit of a game here. I'm going to play some audio, and you're going to tell me, is it real or robot? You ready? All right, I'm going to play it, and then we'll go from there. This is number one.
A new UN report concludes that steep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions are in order if the planet is to avert the most acute punishment.
Raise your hand if you think this is real. Okay, raise your hand if you think robot. That's leaning toward robot. Real person, NPR. Okay, ready for number two?
TikTok could be banned in the United States in mere months. Its lawyers head to court on Monday to fight that outcome, the latest stage in an ongoing clash between the short-form video app and the American government.
Real? Got two hands. Robot. Good job, robot. That's the AI voice on the New York Times. Okay, number three.
White mainline Protestants are some of the country's largest religious groups, but a new study shows their clergy tend to be more progressive than their churchgoers.
Real? Robot. Good job, it's real. That's Axios Today. Okay, number four.
Okay, let's switch to some music that was all you in 2023. These are the songs you couldn't
Real?
get in your head. Sigur Rós first.
One real? Robot? All right, a lot of you probably knew that. That's Spotify. That's a voice clone. So it sounds kind of real in a lot of ways. But obviously, if you're a Spotify listener, you start to know, yeah, that's definitely a robot. And finally.
It's really hitting newsrooms now, and it's changing the game, even for those who've been saying, robots are going to take our jobs for years. You know.
So for those of us who haven't been following every twist and turn, how is this AI wave different from what's come before?
Real? Okay, robot? Okay, this is robot. This is Notebook LM. It's a product of Google. Many of you have probably started to see news stories about this, but basically you feed a document, a PowerPoint presentation, or any sort of data set into the system, and it spits back a summary in the form of kind of a chatty podcast. So as we can tell there, it's kind of confusing what's real and what's robot. The robots are sounding kind of good these days. And this is another example of a technological change that's changing the audio storytelling world and changing what we consume as media consumers. And So Dan showed kind of a timeline of AI. I'm going to go through a slightly different take on the timeline, which isn't necessarily about AI, but how changes in computing technology have really changed how we live our everyday lives and how we consume media content. So let's go back to the dawn of, time for a lot of us in this room. I was a little kid at the time. Whoops. Getting ahead of myself. Okay. Back in the 1970s, computers were mainframe computers. We did not consume content on them. They were the size of refrigerators or, file cabinets. The idea of wearing one on your wrist was absolutely bananas. And we did not even have computers in our homes. That changed in the 80s when we started to all get computers at home. We were not using them, though, to consume content. We were doing word processing, spreadsheets, boring stuff. In the 1990s, that's when the internet came along, and that's the moment when we started to consume content on computers. That's when they were, hooked up to the internet, and we got RSS feeds. Web pages started to be created, home pages. This is when the journalism industry started to create content for online. 2017 was really when mobile devices became something we were all walking around with in our pockets, connected to the internet, wired up to our heads and ears with earbuds, and that's when RSS feeds became audio enclosures, podcasts, and this was really the dawn of the audio revolution, and where we started to see audio storytelling being a way that people consumed media content. 2017 was really when voice platform became something that was becoming, in our homes. And again, a lot of this technology existed beforehand, but this is when we started to see everyday people, not the, leading edge of tech people using this technology. So the voice revolution was interesting in that it really changed how we interact with computers. We weren't using punch cards in mainframes or typing on a desktop or even tapping on a mobile device. We were talking to the computer, and it was doing our bidding, and it was talking back. And we also, at this point, gave them names that were kind of like a person or a pet, Siri, Alexa, sorry if I launch anything talking. And they created this almost like entity type quality. Dan, you mentioned how you always say thank you to the robots. Most of us, or many of us, say thank you to, Siri and Alexa. Or maybe we, call them names and then they tell us we're being rude. So it set up a little bit of this interaction. And then we moved to really when AI starts to be something that everyday people are using, and it starts to change how we are interacting with computing technology and the world. And this is also a moment where AI starts to change audio content. And you've got, robots who are talking. And like all technological revolutions, there's things that we're scared about. And I asked a question earlier today about, ethics. But there's also things the robots do really well. And we're seeing them start to sound pretty darn good. And kind of being able to, converse in a way. I don't know if any of you listen to this podcast, Shell Game. It's an indie podcast. It's fascinating and really funny. Basically, Evan Radcliffe and his wife Samantha Henning, who was one of the creators of The Daily, created a voice clone of Evan, and they hooked it up to an AI chatbot and basically sent it out into the world. It talked to customer service representatives. It talked to phone scammers. It talked to his lawyer, a BetterHelp therapist, and even conducted some interviews for him. And it wasn't as if he was giving it a script to read. He was giving it kind of background information. So in the case of it doing an interview for him, he wrote up the normal things that he would write for himself, a human being, basically some bullet points, a couple key questions that he really wanted to ask verbatim, and I don't even think he did that. I think it was basically bullet points, gave some background information about the interviewee subject, and sent his little AI clone out into the world, and it did a phone or a Zoom kind of interview with the guest. And it wasn't just going through a list. It was listening and responding with something appropriate. And it asked questions that when Evan went back and listened to the recording were pretty spot on. So this may be where we're going in journalism, to this place where we've got these assistants that are helping us out with various parts of our job, maybe even conducting interviews. I mean, I can imagine a world where, a reporter could send this technology out to do a gazillion interviews of a huge number of people that, any one reporter could not do on their own, but perhaps the AI system could go talk to a huge range of people and then, cull through it for some of the best sound bites or whatever. So it opens up some really interesting possibilities when you have this technology that can kind of, fake its way as almost like a person, at least to the degree of being able to, improvise and respond in a way that seems a little human. Did this technology fool people? Sometimes not. Sometimes people got angry with it. It was a little too uncanny valley, and people were like, what the what? Podcast has a lot of expletives. If you're not cool with that with your kids, maybe be careful. But a lot of people gave the system the benefit of the doubt. They thought there was just a connection problem on the phone, or it was somebody who was, neurodivergent. And they just went with it. And this system was able to kind of act like Evan out in the world doing things. Fascinating podcast, highly recommend it. So because the technology has gotten really good, we saw with the voice clones where things could go, but where we are right now is we're seeing AI voices popping up in a lot of places, right? For a while, publishers have really been thinking about how do we create more audio versions of our stories? Because one of the beautiful things about audio is it's kind of lean back consumption. You can be exercising, you can be washing the dishes, you can be going for a walk. Things you can't do, reading a website, right? But if it's read to you, you can have that lean back experience versus a lean in experience. And in the past, media outlets would, obviously give the story to a voice actor to read or the author to read. But that's expensive and it's time consuming. And now the bots are good enough that, you can just do it. They just read the stories. So we're seeing this popping up in a lot of different places. So what this means is if you are a print reporter, a digital journalist, your stories might not be being consumed by being read. Maybe they're being listened to. And that's kind of cool, right? So, you've got this new way of accessing your stories. Except, though, some of the real people we heard sounded like robots, and some of the robots sounded like people. And your mileage may vary here, but I don't know, anytime I'm talking about audiobooks with people, somebody inevitably starts to complain about the narrator. Am I right? This happened? Yes, I'm seeing heads nod. And it doesn't seem to matter if it's a professional voiceover artist, the author of the book, or even a Hollywood celebrity. I mean, my mother was complaining about Meryl Streep reading an audiobook. I'm like, Meryl Streep, come on, this is an amazing actor. How can this be? Well, the thing is, it's not really their fault. Books were written to be read by the eye. They were not written to be, read out loud or heard with your ear. And our eyes and ears process information differently. So eyes are really good at taking in a lot of information all at once. If something's easy to read, we can read faster. If it's hard to read, we can slow down. We can look at something earlier in the text. It's really easy to kind of move around. Ears hear things linearly. So it's like things are just coming at us and we can't control it. And so audiobook narrators do a lot of backflips with their voice and a lot of acting and a lot of inflections and pauses, both so that they can get through the sentence, but also so that you have some chance of taking in the information as it's coming at you. And so there's some real differences between writing for the ear and writing for the eye. And so if more and more stories are being consumed by these bots reading them, it kind of means pretty much every journalist should know a thing or two about audio storytelling if you want to be effective in the landscape that the AI is pushing us into. So let's run through a few things that you should know about audio storytelling, even if you're not primarily an audio journalist. Now, for people who really are primarily audio journalists, we think a lot about all of the normal journalism ethics and all of the normal, parts of reporting that you would be thinking about if you were doing any other type of journalism. This tripped up some major media outlets when they first started doing podcasts, so I always think it's important to say. If you're writing an audio first story, it's going to be a little less, fact dense. There's going to be more emphasis on emotional content because audio is really good at that. And audio stories tend to be more narrowly focused. But they're also written for the ear, and that's the thing I think everybody needs to really be paying attention to now. So, when you're writing for the ear, you are really not writing for the eye, which is different from how we've been trained. Like, writing for the eye really has been the gold standard of writing because everything that we read basically has been written for the eye. Books, magazines, memos, it's all written for the eye. And that's great because the eyes, can read differently than the ear. So we're really thinking about how do we structure things that work well for the ear rather than the eye. And that means writing one thought per sentence. That's really all we process with our ears. It's one idea, it's one idea, it's one idea. So it's one idea, period, new idea with a period, one thought per sentence. It's minimizing, oh, I knew I clicked that twice. It's minimizing the use of numbers. Numbers turn into like number, soup or something when our ears hear them. Eyes are pretty good at numbers. Data visualization's really great at numbers. And in this multi-platform world, if you've got a lot of numbers, you probably shouldn't be putting it into a story that's going to be consumed by the ear. That's probably a data visualization. So we always try to minimize numbers. When you listen to good audio stories, you're hearing comparisons. Things are the size of a few football fields, or a watermelon, or like the size of a paperback book. You name it. They're not like a whole list of numbers with decimals. So again, if you've got a lot of numbers, save that for your chart, save that for your data visualization. Maybe think twice about putting it in something that's going to be consumed by the ear. Short, simple sentences, subject, verb, object, might have gotten you in trouble with your high school English teacher, but it sounds great to hear. Subject, verb, object, period, next sentence, really short, avoiding the subjunctive clauses, the parenthetical elements, the long convoluted sentences, and we'll look at a couple examples in a minute. Actually, we're going to do that right now. So this is something that was written for the eye by the New York Times. And this is what, 6 lines? And it's one single sentence. I can't even start the word. ByteDance and TikTok, which are privately held, said that they've worked hard on a multi-billion-dollar security plan with Oracle, the American software giant, that aimed to handle sensitive US user data separately from the rest of the company's operations. I worked as a voiceover person and a newscaster for years. I sound like a robot reading that, right? You would have probably called me a robot. Because it's written for the eye. I rewrote it for the ear. It's not great writing, but this would be more like what it would need to be if you're writing for the ear. ByteDance and TikTok are privately held. The companies say they worked hard on a multi-billion-dollar security plan with Oracle. Oracle is an American software giant. The plan aimed to handle sensitive US user data separately from the rest of the company's operations. Not the most compelling writing in the world, but as a voice talent, I could read it. You probably were able to ingest it by the ear, even if you weren't listening to it or looking at it. The previous one, if I had just read that, you would be like thinking about what you had for dinner last night, I guarantee. Okay, audio storytelling, we use a lot of verbs. You always think, makes things really interesting if you use a lot of adjectives and adverbs, paints a picture, it's descriptive. Not really. What's more powerful is a single evocative verb that enables you, the listener, to paint the picture in your brain. I also tell people when writing for the ear to stop using all the weird journalese that we use. We use some really weird words. I mean, have you ever looked out the window and thought to yourself, oh, look, a couple youths are walking down to the park nearby? You say kids, right? Do you ever go camping with your friends and you build a blaze to roast marshmallows around? No, it's a fire, Do you ever cut expenditures? You save money. Do you ever say like, oh, that's gonna have negative impact on me? No, you say, it's like, that's gonna hurt me. So think about the words that we normally use in our day-to-day life and use that. One, because it sounds more natural being said, but more importantly, it makes your stories more clear. And it minimizes the wall between you and the general public. And particularly if you're telling an audio story, people can't quickly Google that word because they're just listening if they don't know it. All right. So you're wondering, how do I do this? Sounds hard. The nice thing is our mouths know how to do this. Our hands and our eyes write for the eye. So if you're just looking and you're typing, you are writing for the eye, guaranteed. But we know how to talk. We have learned how to be understandable. So if you say the thing out loud and you transcribe what you're trying to say, it's going to be writing for the ear. I don't know if you've been watching the closed captioning system, and I'm sorry I thought it was automated. It's a human, apparently, which is fabulous, and it's doing a great job. You'll see that most of the sentences we have been saying all throughout this conference are short and direct. They're not long, there's not a lot of parenthetical elements, it's just short, simple, 3 words, 4 words, period. That's writing for the ear. Again, our mouths know how to do this. So if you're trying to figure out how to write for the ear, talk and transcribe what you're writing. All right, what are some clues something is written for the eye? The first is that it's got a lot of commas. If you have commas, take them out, put a period, start a new sentence. Writing for the eye tends to have a lot of conjunctions in the middle of sentences. Writing for the ear might have one at the beginning of a sentence. Seems like a small difference, but it helps make it more understandable and kind of breaks it up. Whoop, hi. Okay, that or which, real clue that it's written for the ear. Parenthetical elements, like a thing in the middle of the sentence that explains something, that's most likely written for the eye. And those long phrased introductions, we see those a lot in news writing. Well, I have an example here. Let me grab my example. Things like, in 1977, when George Lucas's first epic space film Star Wars was filmed, the American public was unacquainted with ... When a better approach might be, George Lucas filmed his epic space film called Star Wars in 1977, period. That was before Americans were acquainted with. Or those introductions that begin with ing, we see this a lot in news writing. Walking into the lights of the television camera, the governor's eyes blinked. Instead of, the governor's eyes blinked when she walked into the TV lights. So just think about those ways that we would normally say things versus the way we write things, particularly in kind of those journalese sort of constructs. All right, so maybe you're sitting here thinking, well, I write for print, or I'm not an audio journalist, so what does all of this that she's been on about for the last 10 minutes have to do with me? And this is the thing, like, we think that writing for the ear and writing for the eye are different, and in some ways they are. But I think things are starting to change in terms of what the public is expecting from us when we are creating journalism. I used to do these trainings for for print newsrooms rather, who were starting to do podcasts, trying to teach them like, okay, this is what you do to take your story and turn it into an audio product. Or I was training somebody who had a job as a print reporter and they just took a job at a podcasting shop or a radio station. But I was doing this workshop one day for a group of editors at a major daily newspaper. And I had them break up and take a story that they had edited the other day and pair up with somebody and rewrite the first paragraph using all the tips we had talked about and then workshop it. And we got back together after we did this exercise, and one of the editors, and we were talking about, how it went and everything, and one of the editors said, the rewrite I did was a much better story. It was more concise, it was more compelling, and it was more powerful. And since then, I've heard this over and over and over from people who were trained as print journalists, that these tips actually work better, particularly in the digital environment. And we are now all in multi-platform newsrooms. And if you're graduating and going out into the workforce, chances are you're going to be working in a multi-platform organization. And it takes a lot of time to create something one way and then repurpose it another way. My recommendation is if you think about writing for the ear, you're writing something that's going to work well for digital stories, for audio stories, for video content, and for social content, with less repurposing, less rewriting, and it's going to make things a lot more efficient. And it's going to sound better when the bots start reading it. So we're definitely at this moment where AI is making it easier and easier and easier to create audio content and distribute audio content. And I want to leave you with a thought that I have been chewing on a little bit. And I don't know that I really have an answer on this one. But stay with me here. So I have been very reliant on and really like the academic theory uses and gratifications. I've found it really helpful as a content creator and as a journalist. I've also found it really helpful as I've thought about how to kind of program and display news content on various digital platforms. And at the risk of, oversimplifying an academic theory, and, some of you professors can come at me later, that's fine. Basically, uses and gratifications helps to explain why we go to the media outlets we go to and what we're looking for. And basically, we're looking for information, entertainment, and a sense of social connectedness. And I've long argued that audio storytelling is super powerful because it's really good at all three, usually simultaneously. When you're listening to audio journalism, you are, of course, getting information. If it's well done, maybe it's not entertaining, but it's compelling. And because it's told by a human with a human voice, you feel this sense of connectedness and social cohesion. And human voices, I've always argued, are what makes audio storytelling super powerful, because you can hear the smile in someone's voice. You know just from somebody's voice whether they're on the verge of tears. You can hear their reaction to a question you asked or what they think about the people in the room. And that's what's enabled audio storytelling to help take us into other people's lives, help us walk in other people's shoes, and help transport us into the stories that audio storytelling brings to you. But what if the stories are now going to be told by robots? Will we have that parasocial interaction with robots? Will we feel that emotional connection with robots? Will we care? And I truly don't know. We might, and we might not. So I wonder sometimes, is AI's ability to, help synthetic voice become, more than just a robot reading things syllable by syllable, but, now that it's analyzing the meaning and turning out an audio version of the text that sounds more natural and sounds more human, does audio storytelling become more ubiquitous but less powerful? And I think that's the question that, I as an audio storyteller and any of you who are thinking about or work in audio storytelling will be grappling with. Clearly we're going to see more of it, because each of the last three technological revolutions, mobile, voice, and now AI, have made audio storytelling either more accessible or easier. And so that's the question that, I'm curious what you think, and it's what I'm going to be thinking about in the days and weeks to come. Any questions about what I've covered, or even about, podcasting, audio storytelling, whatever? Hit me.
Do you want to use the mic at the podium? Sure. Okay.
Not really a question, but an observation. I think the point you made about writing for the ear makes for better written stories is quite true. I spent, 35 years in the newspaper business. And when I launched my investigative reporting center, we took on a TV station as a client/customer. And I had to learn to write much differently.
Yeah.
Writing for TV, much like for radio, is much different. And I found, I think you used the word compelling before, I found that your tips for writing for the ear are actually now tips I give my staff for just writing for the web.
Yes.
Because it's and often that television story that may be 3 minutes, 300 words maybe, is a better, more compelling story than that 2,000 word story, in part because it's concise, but in part because of short sentences, not a lot of jargon, not a lot of numbers. So I think your advice, they're writing for the, and I actually tell my reporters, before you turn it in, go to the back room, read the story to yourself aloud. If it sounds bad to the ear, it's going to sound bad to the eye. It's going to look bad to the eye. So I think your writing tips are just spot on.
I'm glad you're sharing that, because I think it's so important. It makes it easier for the robots, but I think it's going to make it easier for the humans who don't have a lot of time and attention to unpack these big long sentences in a digital story. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm interested in seeing if you have any more tips as we've kind of learned that AI is progressing, learning. I'm assuming that it'll probably learn more inflections of tone. Are there any other tips as maybe AI continues learning and growing in itself? Other things we can do for training our voice and just emphasis of words to make ourselves unique?
Oh, great question. I mean, I think what's interesting about where a lot of the AI voices are going is the fact that it's training on real human voices. And some of the better examples that I played, it wasn't just kind of a synthetic voice, kind of reading things and using generative AI to help decide how to make it more understandable. It was the voice clones that really trained extensively on a human being's speech. So if I understand this correctly from the research I've done, and I'm going to put that caveat there because I don't work at Spotify, my understanding is that that voice clone of the Spotify DJ trained on a lot of audio from that announcer because he was hosting a show for Spotify for a while in the Get Up. And so it has an extensive learning base. So the other part of your question, I think that's what's going to make AI sound better, is it's just going to be better trained by real humans. I think what I also heard in your question was how do you as a real human being like sound authentic and good, right? Okay.
Yes.
And so, for that, it's a lot of just letting yourself be human. And I think that's what's in the days and weeks to come is going to, differentiate us, real meat space creatures from the robots is just our humanity and our personality. And I think for a long time in media, we expected a certain sound from talent, whether it was on camera, and it was on camera talent, we had to have a certain look too, which, with my curly hair, I didn't have. But even for, radio, you were expected to have a radio voice. You were expected to have a certain type of inflection, depending on whether you were working for CBS News or NPR. And you were probably expected to have kind of a Midwestern accent and no identifiable ethnicity or heritage. Like all of that's out the window now, which I think is fabulous. And I think the more that we just be who we are, and yeah, maybe you're being a slightly better version of yourself in that, when you come into a conference like this, you're probably not in your sweats and putting your feet up on the chair. It's sort of the same way when you're doing voice work. You want to be the best version of yourself, but you really want to be yourself. And you don't want to try to be, another person. I'm not going to name names here, but I listened to a show recently. I'm not even going to tell you what format it was. A show recently where there was a new, younger person who had taken over being the main voice of it. And I had heard this individual years ago, had a very unique, very lovely voice. And I heard them recently, and they sounded like somebody who also used to work at that organization and that production. It's like they had kind of put on that person's, like, trying to be like a little voice clone of them. And this person lost all their magic. So hang on to who you are, your humanity, your personality, and let that shine.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anyways, so
Hi.
I'm a broadcaster as my major, and I find myself wondering, will AI kind of create a shift to almost homogeneity in terms of our content? Everything's going to sound the same because they're all being trained on similar models, they're all coming out of similar kind of processes. Is that a worry for you when it comes to the future of audio, not only just audio, but visual and even web storytelling once we integrate AI more and more?
It's a great question. I mean, the short answer is, I don't know. But my sense is they are trying to figure out how to make it more, more unique. I mean, again, the voice cloning, I think, helps with that in that it's training on different types of people, not just one, this is the platonic ideal of a broadcaster. There's a whole range of voices that the clones are being trained on. So I think that's one part of it. I think the other thing, and we were talking about this yesterday, a number of the speakers, we were having a little chat before the program started. And so I'm going to steal something that David said, which is, and feel free to jump in on this, like we're moving from a world where, there's going to be like the homogenized, mainstream white bread was your analogy, the white bread, world. but there's also going to be the artisanal space, right, of the handcrafted, the handmade. And so I think we're going to have both ecosystems, and we already have, and we have for a long time. You know, you've got your big kind of network news sound, and you've had your really, you know, alt kind of podcasts. And I think with every technological revolution, we've had mainstream and we've had our alt. And I think we're going to see that with AI too. You know, there's going to be the very standard versions, but I bet there's going to be another, you know, kind of the makers are going to figure out how to use AI in interesting, innovative, different ways that's going to be creative and novel and interesting. So I suspect it's going to continue to go both directions. And thank you for letting me steal your analogy. Okay. Yeah. Hi.
I wrote down my question. So I love audio stories, but I love them even more when the reporter or voice actor's like accent actually matches the story.
Yeah.
So like if I'm listening to a story about farming in Asheville, I want to hear someone that sounds like they could actually be a farmer in Asheville. So the examples that we listened to, all the AI audio kind of had that like already sort of robotic sounding tone that a lot of NPR like voice actors have and reporters have. Have you seen examples of AI having the ability to replicate those more human sounding accents, like someone from the South or someone from the Middle East? And have you seen AI tools be able to even like recommend which voice may be best for a particular kind of story?
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. Recommending what type of voice would be, oh, you can make some money on that idea.
Oh, say less.
She's leaving now.
I'm like, there's that, that's good. You know, it's a great question. I'm not coming up with any examples off the top of my head. I mean, I think the Spotify DJ has a different sound than, you know, many of, you know, the more, you know, stereotypical, it's like stereotypical Barbie, stereotypical AI and stereotypical NPR. But, you know, I think there's no reason it can't. Like the technology can, it just needs to be trained. So I can totally see a world, and it's probably out there. I'm not familiar with it. I bet it exists because like this is off the shelf technology. In the podcast Shell Game that I was talking about, Evan wasn't using any special stuff he coded. It was all off the shelf stuff. He did a little, you know, tweaking with parameters and settings, but you know, anybody in this room could go get some of these programs, train it on their voice, hook it up to a chatbot, and you know, there's, you know, AI tomorrow running around the world giving talks. I don't know. By the way, Evan also had his robot interviewed for a story about his podcast. So the robot did the interview on his behalf, which was kind of funny. If you listen, the reporter knew what was going on and then hacked it a little bit to learn more about the tech behind the system. Anyway, I digress.
Thanks, Tamar. This was really great. Just side note, I remember I used to be a creative writer, and then I went to journalism school, and I felt like it ruined my creative writing in many ways. And then my first job out of college was as a feature reporter, which is like, if you can get that, that was amazing. And I actually would write based on the feature stories I'd hear on NPR, and that's where I kind of got my new writing voice. But what I'm wondering is, I mean, pretty soon here on every iPhone, AI summaries are going to be like the default, you know, and summarizing your mail, right? And so all that, like summarizing, there's already plugins you can install or that show up in your Microsoft Office suite if your company like enabled it that summarizes things. And I feel like that, you know, subject, verb, object writing, like we're all going to be consuming it because it's going to be in our devices. Do you think that that then creates, and this is, I'm being selfish here, because I like writing. I like my long form writing and all that. And like, do you think that we'll see kind of a hunger that people then have because of all the summarizing for that longer form stuff that does have some of the awkwardly, you know, phrased non-ear based writing, which, you know, maybe I'm being hopeful here because I like reading that stuff, right? When I have time. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's such a good question. And, you know, if you're going to write a literary novel, this is not the way to go, trust me. You know, at the same token, I got dinged in graduate school because I was writing like a journalist instead of an academician. Had to rewrite my entire thesis. Sucked. Anyway, You said something that I think is really key, which is about time. And I think we gravitate to different things based on our time and what we're trying to accomplish. You know, I still listen to vinyl records. I have a huge record collection. I love the imperfection of needle noises and the clicking and the popping and the scratching and the surface noise. Yeah, I can listen to something that's pristine and digital and perfectly clean. And I do a lot, but there are times when I want that different experience and I want that, analog experience. And I think you're talking about something similar there. Like, we're probably all going to continue to read poetry, or many of us who like poetry. Poetry is often really dense and complicated, and you have to read it 9 times till you have some sense of what the heck is happening. But we still crave it because it speaks to us. But it's different. And I think what we see, and this is just, this is my hot take on it, I think what we see is with media, like, there is just so much information, and we need to grab people, we need to get them the information, because clearly people are not getting good quality information these days. And the more direct we can be about it, and if it's going to be an audio, and they're going to listen to it, it needs to be super clear, and it needs to be done in a way that's easy to consume with your ear. But I think there's other times where we want to go, look at a sentence that's just gorgeous and complicated and, like, wow, that's really beautiful poetic writing. That feels like a different space to me. I mean, again, that's like the sourdough bread versus I just need a PB&J on the run, And I think that's maybe the world we're moving into.
Hi, I'm wondering, in terms of your editorial consulting work, about the data, if you know of any, about the data behind whether audiences are listening to the audio versions of text stories, and there's been a big investment by so many organizations, as you noted, on this technology. And do you think that was like a kind of land grab first to make sure that they had it, or are audiences listening to it for the, even though they are essentially being read a print story out loud?
Yeah. It's a great question. I don't have the data. I don't know if anybody in the room does. If you do, please raise your hand. My sense of it, and from what I remember at my time at NPR, is people were not clicking on stories on a desktop website and listening. But there was some of the queuing up of stories and going through playlists. And I think on mobile devices, when we're on the run, my sense is that's where the opportunity is. I think it's also useful in the voice assistant world. And, I think this is where AI is going to start to make that more relevant. Like, you're driving and you're like, hey, what's going on with the da-da-da? And the system can just pull up a story and like, okay, here's the latest from the New York Times, and start reading it for you. And I think that's the environment where it's most likely going to happen, because again, we're talking at our computers now and asking for things. And I think that's the space it's going to happen in. If you're looking through the newspaper, whether it's, it's not going to be in print because you're not going to have a button, but if, you're reading it on the website, you're probably in read mode, not listening mode. If you're on your mobile device, you could be in either mode. If you're doing something else and, you've got your watch or your, device with you, you could be in listening mode very easily. And I think this, to your point, is a land grab for that. I'm going to ask my computer for information. It's going to then get read back to me.
In 2005, 2006, I was producing a podcast series in Lincoln, Nebraska, at the local PBS station. And, I remember time and time again going into the audio booth to record some script that I had written, and I would make a mistake, start over. And when what I'm wondering about this sort of the human artisanal, what that means and what that sounds like or what that reads like, I'm wondering about the role of sort of human imperfection as a part of not just human style, but just imperfection. And I also kind of extend this into a lot of my friends. They do not speak English as their first language. And so there are certain sort of phrases or ways that they speak that, are not sort of exactly correct by a certain, standard. And I just wonder about how, I wonder if AI is going to sort of adopt these sort of unique, which I think those types of turns of phrase also evolve, but just, what does the future look like in terms of human imperfection? But it's not also necessarily wrong, but given how AI seems to be always moving towards there's this level, this standard, that how does that all fit together as a part of this sort of artisanal versus AI, I guess, comparison?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what's interesting about it is, there's a point where the imperfections are charming. And in the early days of podcasting, you started to hear a return to some of the ums and the ahs, and that was considered like kind of cool and groovy. And then everybody started doing it, and it just became like a parody of itself, right? And I think you see a little bit of that with the AI, and where it gets a little uncanny valley, where you hear it kind of like imitating some of those human imperfections, but it's a robot, and it's sort of weird to hear a robot go, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. And it's like, yeah, right. And you sort of roll your eyeballs. And I think you hear that with the Notebook LM product, is they're doing these things that sound like chatty podcast, and you're just like, blah. And so I think this is where, the question I ended with is like rattling around in my brain. There are things we humans do that are authentic and charming and lovely. And when the robots do it, it's just creepy and weird. So I don't know that robots are ever, I don't know, maybe they will. Like, I never say never, because anytime I've said never, the technology has nailed it like 2 days later. But it feels to me improbable that we're going to find like human imperfections charming in robots. I don't know. Maybe there'll be something else that robots do that's like charming robot. And we're going to be like, oh, that's robot being robot. And that's going to have this level of like robot authenticity. And then there's going to be the more human authenticity. I don't know. I'm spitballing here, but it's a great question. And I think this is what we're all going to see as this technology unfolds, and we play around with it in different ways, and we create voice clones of ourselves, and we try it out in our journalism, whether it's audio or digital journalism, and we're going to figure out what is robot style, what is human style, in a world where there are going to be human storytellers and there's going to be robot storytellers. Yeah.
Thank you for especially the year thing. Your rules. So I've often found that when you intersect one discipline of the mind with another discipline, it clears up the other discipline. It just seems like the way the year discipline cleans up the print writing. Mm-hmm. I think this is happening in so many other areas. If I come into journalistic sourcing with engineering, I am able to clear something up. It's just two different areas work. This thing about the Shell Game podcast, I'm going to listen to it. Thank you for recommending. Did the question come to the actual reporter that if he's using his AI bot to call and interview other people sourcing, what if the other person's so busy that they say, I'm going to get my AI to talk back to you, and then that AI is Claude version 3.1 that hallucinated a couple of lines, not Claude 3.9, and then lo and behold, the quote showed up somewhere. I'm sure he got asked this.
He got into this. There's a funny bit in the podcast. I shouldn't give it away. You should just listen. But there's one part in the podcast where Evan Robot ends up talking to another voice bot. Neither of them had been programmed to end the conversation. So it just went on and on and on and on, and like neither of them knew how to say, okay, thanks, bye. And it just like, they just kept like, oh, okay, well, how was your day? How was your day? What are you going to do this evening? What are you doing this weekend? And it just went on and on and on. So there's some funny instances in there of like the robots talking to robots, but this might be the world we're going into, where it's our bot talking to your, my bot talking to your bot. I'll have my bot get with your bot and get back to me. I don't know. Yeah. Thank you for the great questions. Any last question? Okay. Oh, the button on the top. Try the button at the top. There's a mute button on the top.
Test. Hello.
There you are. Hello.
So really, I guess the question here is, should I feel awful about this, or should I feel like this is inevitable? Just a real world example, like, what did Taylor Swift say? I'm the problem, it's me. I basically was trying to put out a promo video 2 months ago for the launch of our product, and we target our product very much at a female audience. So the way that the script was written, the way that I'd written it with a voice actor who's a good friend of mine in Brooklyn, she has this incredible, she's fierce. You know what I mean? Like, she plays on my soccer team. Like, you don't mess with Paula. And I know that she's a voice actor as well. I'm like, man, you just have that sort of confident tone that I just really want to, it would really work for this script. And I reached out to her and I was like, I would love to hire you for this. And she goes, that's great. Union, so it's not going to be quite as simple as just hiring me. It might take a week or two. I have to take it to the union, get a request and everything. And, we didn't have that time. Yeah. And she had said, I really appreciate you kind of reaching out and trying to hire me like this. In the age of AI, it's getting a little dicey out there. Right. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but 2 weeks. And I did look into Notebook AI, and I'll be totally honest with you. That's what I did. Yeah. It cost me, she was going to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars for what was a 30-second read. And I just had more control over it, and I was able to put that out. And to be honest with you, nobody ever could tell the difference. Right. And as a former broadcast journalist myself, I'm like, ugh. I didn't tell her this. I told her we found someone else, but now I feel kind of ashamed. But then I'm thinking to myself, well, obviously this is where it's all going to go anyways. And so should I feel that way? Is it just we're all going to end up taking that step eventually, but at what cost? Right. In this case, it was a time and money cost, but I would be lying if I said she wouldn't have been better for the job. But when time constraints, we're talking about AI as efficiency. That's just efficiency, So
exactly.
I don't know if I should feel terrible about that or not.
No, I wouldn't feel terrible about it. I mean, that's just how it works. Technology changes, and people. I'm not going to say people lose jobs. Jobs change. Roles change. What is going to be done by humans is going to change as it's being assisted or replaced or complemented by technology. It's just the unnatural order of things these days. So I wouldn't feel bad about it. I think, though, you're pointing to something that I think about a lot. It's there are some tasks the robots really should just do. A promo, fine. A story where you really want the audience to walk in somebody's shoes and feel something, that might be a job that humans are better at. So I think we're picking and choosing in everything we do. This isn't just audio storytelling. What can the robots do well, and what can the humans only do well? What do you delegate to the robots? What do you hold on to yourself? It's the same thing we think about with management. What do you delegate? What do you do yourself? And that's where we're at. So yeah, don't feel guilty.
Thanks.
I absolve you.
Only because you said so.
Yeah, right. Somebody else is like, oh my God, I can't believe. No. Thank you for the great questions.
Hey, thank you, Tamar.